Hi there, and welcome to my next Photoshop tutorial. What we're looking at here is an image that I created with a young model who happens to be a model for a graphics card, a PC graphics card. So she works for this company, and she wanted to do something on her own that was more in line with the video game experience than what she does with them. So she contacted me after seeing some of my Heroes series, which can be considered video game inspired. And she gave me a list of some different characters and different games that she really enjoyed playing and wanted to recreate something from. So I went and I Googled these various characters, and the one that stuck out was Alma from the game Fear. So what I did is I Googled and I just went through the image search and I just kind of scrolled through it, and I found it very interesting. She's a beautiful girl, and to make her really almost repulsive was kind of a unique, fun challenge, and to make her really scary. She's an unimposing, sweet person, and to be able to take her and make her something totally different that will creep most of us out was really just kind of a great challenge and a great addition to her portfolio. So what I did is I just came through here and I looked. She's usually wearing a red dress. This image or one similar to it back when I was looking kind of struck me with the lightness behind her and that overhead lighting. Hair over the eyes, darkened edges. I also noticed that there's a lot of blur around her and mystery, and it's that overall creepy vibe that just kind of grabbed me. So after viewing a few pages of these images, I came up with a concept. Number one is I definitely wanted to stay with the red dress that I saw in most of them, because I just felt that would tie it together more than if I did something that was outside of that. If I went with something that didn't match, it would be harder for the gamers to really see it and be like, oh, that's Alma. So I decided we should do the red dress. So the morning of the shoot, we met at my studio, and we headed out to Ross and got a discount red dress that was a bunch too big for her, and we cut it apart with scissors and pinned it fast to her so that it looks like it fits in the photo. Let's go back to the photo. So as you can see, we kind of hacked the dress apart, and then the location was this great location that I had scouted a few years earlier. I had found it when I was just out driving the desert looking for great locations to shoot, and this one really captivated me. It was an old ranch house that has been abandoned for at least, I think, about 50 years. It had been a ranch house, and after the automation and they needed less ranch hands, the house went abandoned. And then in the 1940s or so, from what I understand, local legend has it became a brothel that was used for about 20 years until it was shut down. And since then it's been empty. So it's this big house with 7 or 8 bedrooms, a tiny little kitchen, 1 bathroom, and it's been just completely falling apart. As you can see, the ceiling has fallen in. The floor is covered with ceiling parts and dirt and all kinds of stuff. The windows are completely broken out. The plaster's falling out. It's just the perfect place for this type of shot. So let's go ahead and look at the treatments that I used. The first thing I want to do is go back to the RAW file and in Adobe Camera Raw, and what you'll notice is that what you see here looks pretty neutral. It was actually shot with studio strobe, so it was a bit warm out of the camera, and that was because of the dark and the wood in the ceiling, and the brown in the floor kind of bounced around a lot of slightly warmed light, soaked up a lot of the power. I have some really powerful strobes, and so I shot it, and then when I brought it into Camera Raw, I wanted to cool it down a little bit, just a little bit more than neutral, so that I had a cool rendering of her face to work with to start with. So I ended up going to 4,500 degrees, and I think that if you look at look at her face, you can see that it's just slightly cool or about neutral, and that's exactly what I was going for. So that's pretty much all I did in Camera Raw. And again, as always, 16-bit, and this time again I used ProPhoto. I was going through a ProPhoto phase for a while. I've switched back to Adobe RGB for most things because it's easier to get ready for the web and to get ready for print. So okay, so here we're back at the image, and we're going to hide all the layers. The first thing I did, and I usually do this to the type of image that I want to bring out those details, ones with hair that I really want to accentuate, is I do my my grunge effect that used to be called the Dave Hill look. And if you're not sure how I do that, I don't want to go through the whole process again. It only takes about a minute or two, but I have a good tutorial on my website and on YouTube that's it's called either Glam to Grunge in under a minute on my website, or the Dave Hill look. I think you can also find it under. But if you look through my my tutorials, you should be able to find it pretty easily. So I'm not going to go much further into that. And then the next layer is a photo filter, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to warm it up. And if you remember, the images are pretty warm overall in in those samples that I saw. So I wanted to be faithful to that, but I wanted to stay cool on her face. I didn't want to warm her face up. I kind of wanted that warmth around her, that like the place is glowing a little bit. So I decided to do that just by using a regular old warming filter. It's the 85 warming filter, and then I just masked it out from her face and chest and around here, and I just let it fade out, which gives that that look of it's just a little bit juxtaposed. Things don't quite belong the way they are, which is good in this type of image. And if you don't know, I just hit the backslash key to show the mask. I know a lot of these shortcuts are hard to find, and I'm not sure how popular certain ones are or not, but the backslash key will show and hide the layer mask. The next thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to do a blur, and the best way I found to blur is to just create a copy of the image, and then you just use your menu and you just do filter, blur, and either Gaussian or surface blur. Surface blur takes a lot of time on some processors. Gaussian is a slightly different blur, but it works well. And seeing how I'm going to fade out the blur around her and the edges where she's a little bit sharper, Gaussian's fine. So I did that there, and again you can see the mask. I kept her mostly sharp and let it fade away from her and blur. And then I just copied that layer again and did it again to get even more blur around the outside edges. And I like to do things like that in steps so that I can always go back and I can compare, I can look at it. I can create a third layer and say, oh, that's too much. I can also, as you see here, the opacity is only 25%. If I crank it up, it's way too blurry. Actually, it has its own cool effect, but it wasn't what I was going for. So we go back down. It was at 25. I'll leave it at 26 now. And then we add a curves layer, and what we're doing here is, again, we're using my just drag it down and paint it in with layer masking. And I go over this in other tutorials quite a bit, so I don't want to belabor it. I don't want every tutorial to have every step in it. You just watch the series. They don't take that long if I can shut up soon enough. So again, let's look at it without and with. And what we're doing is we're darkening this bottom left corner. One of the things that I probably should have mentioned early on is how I lit it. Sometimes things like that are obvious to me, mainly because I was there and because I've been doing it for a long time. But I had a large, I think I used my 7-foot Octabox directly overhead, basically over my head, and I'm shooting with the 10mm lens, so I'm in real close to her, and that's why we get that wide perspective behind her and why her head's much bigger than her tiny waist. But that's that distorted perspective we saw in those still shots. So I have this giant softbox overhead, and then I have I think a 5-inch reflector on a second strobe over camera left, just out of scene. And if you look at uh, the shadow right here, you can see that's the shadow that's usually cast by the edge of a reflector when it's out of scene. And I want to shoot down that wall and really accentuate the shadows and the bumps. I want to accentuate the bumps by having them cast shadows on the wall, so I get a lot more grit feeling in that wall, and it becomes more contrasty than if I had shot it straight on. Another thing to point out is it was a bright sunny day. If you look out the window carefully, you could probably tell that it's daylight just way underexposed. It looks kind of like nighttime, but it is daylight out there. Let's go back. I think I shot it like a 200th at f/22. Oh, there it is. 1/200th of a second at f/22 at ISO 250, and again at 10 millimeters. Also, I was looking. I don't. I did add a little bit of a contrast in camera raw. So back to the image. The next thing I wanted to do was make her eyes glow, and that was easy enough to do. I just created a little bit of a glowing area, and then masked some of the hair out. Hang on, there we go. Zoom in again. See that little bit of glow there, and it does go over some of the hair, but it stops around some of the hair, so it looks more like it's glowing than if it was just glowing on top of that hair. And I felt like that wasn't quite enough, so I added a second glow layer, and again, you can use percentages and blend them in. Again, 34% on that one. So let's go back to the full screen or the fit on screen mode. And this next layer, what I did is I lightened the midtones and the near highlights. And let's go back and let's just bounce back and forth. You can see what I was doing was creating that glow behind her, similar to what looked like that fire in between the buildings and that other image that I really liked. So I went about my own way of doing that, and then I just masked out the parts of her that I didn't want to glow like that. Pretty straightforward. Then this next one, I darkened her hair and her head. One of the problems that you have with photography is that you may want something lit one way, but something right next to it lit a completely different way. And there's some ways around that. You could set up your lighting in a way that the light rakes down across her face, but then doesn't light the hair on the top of her head, which would be very difficult to do, and then you'd have a harsh shadow you had to deal with. So I typically take the easy way out. If this was back in the film days, I would have just done a lot of burning on her head to bring her hair into the zone 5 or so, like that. There's a little bit dark, and all I had to do here was again just use my curves tool and drag it down a whole bunch. You can see even the shadows are brought down, because I really wanted to bring the dark areas down to almost black, as well as the mid-tones down quite a bit. So that was pretty much all I had to do tonality-wise. And then in the end, I felt like just a little bit more of that grungy, sharpened look would work. So I added another layer of that. Again, look at my Glam de Grunge. It gives you a quick tutorial on how to do that, and then I just masked out the areas that I wanted to continue to be blurry. And sometimes when you sharpen a blurred layer and then blur on top of it and go back and forth, you get an ethereal effect that I don't know how else you would reproduce it. So again, that's pretty much this image. Probably a lot less Photoshop than one would think when they first look at it. At least I hope so. And Don't forget to check out all my other tutorials at daronshade.com. That's DARONSHADE. And, you can link to me on Facebook, Twitter, Google Plus, and other social networking on the top right-hand corner of my website. There are little icons to link to my pages on each of those. So I hope to see you there. And please, I've been getting a lot of people have been viewing these videos. I've been getting a lot of downloads of the PSD support files, which will also be available for this one on my site. Please, if you do that, I'd love to hear from you. And get some feedback and some direction on what maybe I should be doing next. And also, please like the video on Facebook. On Facebook, on YouTube. I'd really appreciate that. But definitely, if you're looking at this stuff and maybe there's pieces that are missing, or you've seen some of my other work and you're wondering how I do it, or just anything that you think I might be able to help you with, I'm always looking for great new Photoshop tutorials. So hopefully I'll hear from you. Thank you.